There are so many things I could say about the United States. And for starters, the founders, when they initially started sort of getting the idea that they would split off from the British Empire and make this place a country, they were smart enough to not splinter it up into several countries because they could have done that, just like Europe. But they had the benefit of Europe and seeing how if you had a situation with a bunch of different nations together like that, you would be at war all the time. If the United States had become two countries or had become 50 countries or whatever, we would have been at war, most likely, for 250 years now, you know. And it was very, very good. It was a very good idea to come up with the idea of states as they are. To have a three-branch federal system where you have the executive, legislative, and judicial as a sort of triple entente, and then you copy and paste that in 50 states. I mean, that was a stroke of genius because it's like I've said before, we have the benefit of the Roman Empire and empires of the past and how they tried to do things, how they tried to administer. And all of Europe. Europe ended up becoming a vast history of how to do politics. It became a political discourse in and of itself, because the idea of the nation state is a relatively new thing. Like Germany wasn't Germany until the 1800s, and by the time World War I had struck, the Ottoman Empire was still around. And the Ottoman Empire was obviously the predecessor of the Roman Empire and the Byzantine, the Eastern Roman Empire. So that tale of history had gone all the way up until World War I. And Germany had just entered the scene, and they had a lot to prove. And we all know what happened. And same with Japan. Japan wasn't a nation state until later, but when they discovered what the West was doing technologically and in terms of statecraft, man, they picked that shit up quick and just faster than anybody else by far. They were out there building aircraft carriers and destroyers and planes just within 30 years. Within 40 years, they had gone from a mostly agrarian, very medieval sort of situation to a modern state. I mean, it was still sort of a hybrid, but absolutely unbelievable what they did. And those two countries sort of just burst on the scene, and they had seen what the sort of European model was, and they wanted to sort of begin to build their own empires. And in a way, you can understand why they thought that way. But the United States, the United States is not your classic empire. I wouldn't even call it an empire. You could theoretically call the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast a land empire, but it's not at all. The United States after World War II discovered that if you're going to have influence throughout the world, you have to do it covertly. You have to have an overt hard power and an overt soft power, as well as a very robust set of covert actions. And we were first sort of just figuring this out at that time, because the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, was just coming around during World War II and just before that and just after it. So in the same way that Germany and Japan sort of burst on the scene and just were involved in these huge world wars, the United States version was post-World War to become a sort of covert influence-seeking machine, but it was contrasted with the Soviet Union. Anywhere on Earth that the Americans caught wind of a group of people somewhere in some country, no matter where it was, they caught wind that there was a communist revolution going on or any sort of communist group forming. They knew that that meant that it wouldn't be long before they were seeking support from Moscow. And Moscow was always ready and willing to train and arm and set up any communist revolution or communist organization where it sprang up. So the United States was a sort of twofold situation where they were trying to prevent the expansion of communism and expand their own influence at the same time. And it was very messy. A lot of human history is very messy. Human history is riddled with these heroic, gallant, honorable stories and people who are also loaded with just terrible things as well. But your examination of history has to include both. But your own mind, your own ability to discern has to be able to distinguish between great feats of an individual up against their mishaps and their evil, even in some cases. And a smart person can weigh those two things and sort of conclude a net good or a net bad. And it's those people I can respect and see as actual intellectuals, as actual honest thinkers who can examine a person or a place or a thing, weigh the good and the bad, and give you a honest picture of what happened and their opinions on it. And the United States seems tailor-made to be a superpower. The Mississippi River, the entire just swath of arable land, the Great Lakes. The Mississippi River is the longest navigable river, including its tributaries, on Earth, and it makes shipping so cheap. Shipping by rail, shipping by truck is obviously far more expensive than shipping by boat. And that is such a gift, that Mississippi. And then we have the Intracoastal Waterway, which is beautiful for transit as well. The United States sits basically not at the center of the world, but in a position where it has access to the East and the West, the Atlantic and the Pacific. It's a place that was made to have a strong global navy because you have full access to the Atlantic and the Pacific, and no other country really has that sort of sweet spot. And you add to that friendly neighbors to the north and friendly neighbors to the south. North America as a block. Hypothetically, let's say if North America was unified under one flag, it would be the most powerful superpower this world has ever known. The United States alone still has so much more potential that is yet untapped, that we will tap. But if you combine North America together, man, you would have just an absolute behemoth of a country, of a people. Especially if managed properly, and if the people were of sound mind. And then you go over to the Eastern Hemisphere, and China sits almost in the exact same place in terms of latitude on the globe. It's right across the planet, and it sits just about the same spot the United States does, but on the other side of the globe. And China does want to be our peer. They want to be the United States, but for their area. But for China, you go to the west, and you have Afghanistan, and you have the Asia Minor areas. You have land, you have people. You don't have the Pacific like we do. And then you go to the east off China, and you have Japan and the Philippines and Taiwan, South Korea. You're basically walled in. You don't just have a free Atlantic like we do. And those nations aren't, I don't want to say hostile to China, but they're on guard. Let's put it that way. But speaking long term, geopolitically, I would say the United States is going to take an adversarial position with China for now. But eventually, I think it would be extremely advantageous to have China as a sort of covert partner, where we sort of treat them like adversaries, borderline enemies publicly, but privately, we're shaking hands and making deals. Because the way things are now, especially if you have sort of a similar arrangement with India, but maybe you're publicly a little bit more friendly, China is in a position to turn Russia into a vassal state. They have accomplished what they dreamed of accomplishing in the 1950s, which is to become stronger than its friends, quote unquote, to the north. And that the secret, you see, the secret to geopolitics, yes, for a time it was hard power and just straight up invading another country, but the real secret is building and developing a educated, motivated, proud population, and a strong economy, and a strong legal system, a strong social system, a strong government. You build that, and then you begin to invest economically elsewhere. And that's how you get into other countries. You do it economically, which is what we figured out a long time ago. That's what Hitler was so worried about. A lot of what he talked about was international businessmen, international bankers, all this stuff, because he didn't like the way the United States and others were setting up businesses and very large businesses inside of Germany and taking over parts of their economy. That was part of what made him so, weird, for lack of a better term. And that was the failure of the communists. The communist system was not meant to pump out wealth. On paper, the communist system, it was broken from the start. The reason why capitalism works is because capital includes not just money, it's people, assets, land. It's R&D. It's everything that goes into generating more, into generating surplus. So if you're a capitalist, if you are primarily driven by capital, you are driven by all things that grow. And a good capitalist system is going to be, let's say, 70% capitalism, and 30%, let's say, socialist or regulated or something like that. And by that I mean, in the United States, when it first started, it was completely unfettered capitalism, so much so that the British imported slaves. That's how just unregulated and just Wild West it was. Everybody just trying to make money, even at the complete exploitation of other people. But over time, as the U.S. kicked the British out, and within 80 years they had abolished slavery, they had realized at some point that you can't just have unlimited capitalism. You have to have some golden ratio of capital-driven economy and regulation. You have to have good regulation and intelligent regulation in the right amounts. You can't have too much of it. You have to have the ability for people to own property, own land, own businesses, own their own labor, own their own assets, own their own products, own everything. You have to let the public own everything. But it has to be regulated to where you can't just completely just exploit the shit out of everybody, and we know that by now, but back then it was sort of a who's who of just going crazy with it. And we've come to realize that because freedom, true freedom, unfettered freedom is a sort of place where the disciplined and the let's say those who are in a position of advantage will perpetually advantage at the extreme detriment of others. We have this capitalist system here that has labor unions, that has had several movements over time for the rights of the worker, which is something communism could have only dreamed of. There weren't even. It was not a worker's paradise. It was basically serfdom. In the United States, you can accrue power and wealth and truly carve out your position in this world just by the fruit of your own efforts and some luck and some other factors. You don't need the power of law. You don't need necessarily to quote-unquote oppress. In the United States, somebody can get extremely wealthy and benefit others along the way. Most of the time, it's not a crook or a negative venture that is making people wealthy. Most of the time, the person getting wealthy is benefiting huge amounts of other people along the way. And that's one of those things that's so ubiquitous, it's easy to forget. And what we have here is not only that, but sciences in the area of economics and finance and business. Things that nobody even knew existed back in the day. We have ways of governing and monitoring this economy that were basically witchcraft hundreds of years ago. And it has formed this stable behemoth of an economy. This place just sops up the world's minds because everybody wants a chance to come to the land of the free and carve their piece out and make their name. And so many people do, and I'm so glad to see it. Because to me, I look at this thing within the context of all that's happened before. I don't just look at now as just a snapshot and just strictly judge today's events as today's events. They are the tip of the spear of a very long stream, a momentum that's been gathering and carrying for a very long time. And the United States is going to be a place that plays the decisive role in enabling humanity to leave this planet and become a multi-planetary species. We're going to get to a point to where we find asteroids and local minor celestial bodies that are hundreds of millions of tons of rare earth, or hundreds of millions of tons of minerals that are rare on Earth but extremely abundant in the universe. I mean, imagine finding a giant rock of copper and lithium and just other basic elements that's worth hundreds of trillions of dollars. I mean, imagine what that would do for the planet. Imagine if we could mine locally outside of Earth and sanitize the product we brought back and examine it, make sure we're not bringing anything back harmful. But imagine if we got that down. Imagine how much that would change things. I mean, debt would be a thing of the past. The U.S. government, if they went as a partner in such a venture, would bring in so much revenue that they would our debt would be gone in no time. Trillions would be a very small figure. We would be talking numbers that are absolutely astronomical. And if we did get into that, we would be adding to the mass of the planet along the way. We would be bringing in exotic metals. We would be able to manufacture outside of Earth's orbit. I mean, here we're dealing with weight. Imagine a factory right outside of Earth's atmosphere in zero gravity, where you're dealing with machines that weigh hundreds of tons, but they're weightless. Imagine how much that would change manufacturing if you're not dealing with weight, you know? I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. That's mind-blowing what can be done. And there are local celestial bodies, moons, that are made of gas, that are made of natural gas, that rain natural gas from the sky. There are things around us that seem science fiction, that are just absolutely, literally out of this world. And the United States will continue to improve and improve and improve. And here we have this sort of experiment where we tried out this system where the people of the country collectively decide and vote on who they want to manage it. And anybody can do that. Now, I know you can say that there's an entrenched political class, an entrenched elite class, but that's not the system as it's supposed to exist. Let's say that there's no law or there's no regulation that says so-and-so has to be in charge for this period of time or anything like that. It's always up to us to decide and choose. But we tend to like somebody and continue to vote for them, and I totally understand that. But anybody at any point can do something. And on the whole, there's a great deal of satisfaction in the United States, comparatively. And it's so easy to, I guess, forget, because we don't have that other end of the scale to compare ourselves. All we have is each other here. And you know, for us, the scale is very small, but the rest of the planet, the scale is very large. And people say it all the time, you know, spend a year in Afghanistan or whatever, and see how it changes the way you view this place. And it would, it no doubt would. But let's say, for example, you had this place, and this place had two types of people. There were people who had red shirts and people who had green shirts. And you can't remove those shirts. They're on you forever. You're born that way. And let's say, in this place, the green shirts and the red shirts, they live together harmoniously. They don't have any sort of bias against each other based off of their shirt. On a long enough timeline, how long before somebody says, I don't know about those green shirts? How long before somebody pokes through the history of the relationship between the green shirts and the red shirts and locates this very tumultuous time and says, the green shirts did all this to us at this time. They made us victims at a time. We used to be separate. How long before somebody begins to split people up based off of that premise of their shirt color? How long before that happens? Does it seem inevitable? It seems like an inevitability, because human beings have this thing, like with religion, for example. Once we discover that something is able to make us powerful, we tend to bend circumstance so that we can use that thing to accrue power. Like a lot of these religions, on their face, are not bad at all. A lot of these religions don't have a single word in them about killing or doing harm or getting wealthy, even. Nothing at all. In fact, they say the opposite. But people getting into the mix is where things start to change. People use institutions for their own aims. And we all know this, we all understand this, but the United States was designed with that in mind. And to somebody who would come along and say XYZ to try to splinter up the red shirts and the green shirts, I would ask what your motive is. Because that very person might say that they want equality. And then I would say to them, well, on paper, we are equal, and as human beings, we live this way. We don't judge each other off of that simple, that premise, off your shirt color. And I would say, well, what is your motive for this agitation? Is it for you? Are you trying to increase and improve the relationship between the green shirts and the red shirts? Because the relationship was fine. It reminds me of us in a way with race. Because I live in Florida, and down here, there's all kinds of races living together, all mixed together, living together, working together, being together. Nobody cares about the race or where you came from. Nobody cares about that stuff. I almost feel like a lot of people in the United States have watched a lot of movies and shows, and that they've come to believe that that's how the world actually is. I think some people interpret history as the same thing as somebody who interprets religion as something to exploit for power. I think some people look into history so that they can use it now for themselves at the cost of everybody else. And I think people say one thing and intend another, and I think that's pretty obvious. Unfortunately, the people of this place are pretty smart. You can only do that for so long before things change. And that's the thing. It's up to us. I mean, let's say, hypothetically, in the United States, it was perfect, and we were all humans, and we recognize each other on that level before all else. Let's say that happened. How long before somebody comes along and begins to splinter people up? And why? How long before somebody sees that they can start a group or put down another group at the cost of everybody else? I mean, it's kind of a big thing to call somebody like a racist or a sexist. It's kind of a big thing, but it doesn't seem like it because so many people use those words. They just throw them around like it's nothing. And those people, they're revealing to me more than anything what it looks like inside their own mind, not the world. It's not the world that I see. I've known so many Republicans throughout my entire life, and I've known so many Democrats. These things that I hear about both are so horribly wrong, so horribly inaccurate. And you hear these things over and over again, and it becomes clear over time that the motive is not pure, so to speak. And one does desire, one wishes to see what these people say behind closed doors, what they actually think. Because, it's like I said, we're trying to do something over here. We're trying to have the world's people who are bound by the same thing, by the same feeling, by the same desire, because we all want the same thing. We all want more for us, not at the extreme expense of others. We ideally want more for us and more for others too. And yes, there are evil people, there always will be, but this system, this place, this country was designed to survive with corruption in it. It was designed to survive with people abusing it. And people talk about civil war and stuff like that. That's not going to happen. The United States is a very big place. If something does break out somewhere, it would likely be regional, and you wouldn't really see this fantasy about a giant civil war. It's not going to happen. It just isn't, you know. Too many people like this place. Too many people understand what would happen if that happened. I mean, we even saw the last 4 years what happened to the world when the executive branch was occupied by somebody who was not proactive in advancing the position of the United States. It's time that the United States and its leadership accepted this place and its role in the world, what it actually is. It's not an empire. It's the sort of place that other nations around the world lobby for us to set up military bases in their country. Throughout all of human history, nations had to invade each other. They had to manipulate each other and bully each other. But for us, people lobby for our presence. That's who we are. We have probably 1,000 military bases throughout the world. And if the United States disappeared today, you would have all the major countries of the world, all the major regions, immediately pushing their borders. Immediately. And this effect is more than I can put into words. It doesn't seem like it, where we're just so used to things, you know. But even at just the perception of weakness here in this country, people start getting ideas because people have ambitions. People have areas of history that they've selected as motivation. And you know, it's kind of funny, Putin, he would have been much better off doing what he was doing in the 90s and the 2010s. He was integrating more with Europe and just getting more and more connected with Europe. He would have been much better off to tether that western part of Russia, Moscow and everything, into Europe and become more and more European, and eventually become the leader of Europe from Moscow, and through positivity, let's put it that way, integrate so deeply that Moscow effectively is the leader of that bloc, because they did have the potential to do that. If Moscow and Russia, Western Russia especially, European Russia, was perceived to be a truly friendly and prosperous place, believe me, people would be going there. Because it's this weird area that we've all known for the last 100 years has been just completely off limits. Moscow and all these places would have seen tourism, it would have seen all kinds of people coming to work out there. I mean, and it's just unbelievable the route that they took. They set themselves back decades by choosing the wrong path. I mean, and imagine it too. Russia has always lived in the shadow of Europe. They've always wanted their sort of acceptance, and they've always wanted to be on the level of France and the UK and Germany. Imagine if you were the first Russian leader to integrate Western Russia with the rest of Europe, so much so that it was a full partnership, a full allyship and partnership, and where it all grew together as one bloc. And the vast resources of Eastern Russia used to fuel it. Cheap energy, cheap electricity, cheap gas, access to warm water ports. You could build up your military in peace. But no. you had to take that route. And honestly, man, it's unfortunate because I wanted that for Russia. I did. After the fall of the Soviet Union, and Russia wanted so bad to be respected, you know. And they kind of were for a time. They were the number two military in the world, at least by perception. Everybody thought they were so strong, but not anymore. And the United States needs to truly embrace its role as the sole real superpower, because China's not really a superpower. It's a strong power, but it's not a superpower in the way the United States is. It's not even right to compare the two. Accept itself as a planetary superpower who gladly takes the destiny of the world in its hands and beyond. That is our role. That's why we are here. And the world would be better for it, especially because we're sort of past the days of the the days of coups and just revolution and you know using our military as a real invasion force. The U.S. is not going to be fighting wars with massive armies like in World War II. We're going to be fighting wars with um, mostly our own intelligence and support, like the way Ukraine is fighting and the way Israel is fighting. We're not going to be landing troops anymore. We're going to be fighting wars mostly with drone heavy, technology heavy, and small contingents of soldiers who have access to air power and sea power and just have access to a web of weapons, turning basically each soldier into like many, many, many soldiers. Gone are the days of massive infantry armies and huge invasion fleets. That's not what we do anymore. It's not what we're going to do. Anywhere in the world where a situation pops up where war breaks out, we're going to use the local armies, if anything, because they're the ones who are being invaded, and we're going to support them. And depending how strong of an ally we are going to give them better or worse equipment, like Ukraine is. A lot of equipment is 30, 40 years old, F-16s and Javelins, and it's literally equipment that we were in the process of retiring or have retired. It would have just been taking up space on shelves. It would have cost money to store it, actually. They did us a favor in a way. And geopolitically, I don't know if it seems like it to you guys, but the United States has never been in a better position than it is right now. We are poised to have a absolutely fantastic next 10 years. Economically, militarily, socially, geopolitically, technologically, scientifically, philosophically. I can feel the soul of this place, and honestly, you have very good reason to be optimistic.